Hello, and welcome to the Anexinet Infrastructure Modernization Podcast. Here on AIM, we invite industry professionals and subject matter experts on to discuss current trends and technology topics. Today, we will be talking about the evolving topic of ransomware with HPE. With us today is James Morrison, Cybersecurity Distinguished Technologist from HPE. James, how are you doing today?
Doing good. How are you doing, Chris?
Not too bad. That is quite the title.
Yeah. I mean, so, they hire you as a distinguished technologist, and then my background has been cybersecurity. So they said, so what is your parenthetical? And I was like, well, it's cybersecurity, I guess. And so I often take away the distinguished and say cybersecurity technologist at HPE just because it rolls better off the tongue.
Feels like it would fit better on a business card as well.
Absolutely.
And with me, as always, is the Robin to my Zorro, Dave Mahoney.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody.
How you doing?
Oh, finishing up lunch, but I'm great.
Anything good? Did you get like a solid, like a hoagie, or you being responsible with a salad? What's going on?
Leftover pulled pork. I smoked a really nice pork shoulder on Monday, and I'm having some of that, and it's wonderful.
Not bad.
Now you're making me hungry.
Yeah, well, I figured, if I was going to be hungry, I was going to make you guys suffer, but now I'm not hungry anymore, so now I'm just mean. I don't know.
And you're still making us suffer.
I know. I apologize for that. I want to be a distinguished technologist, though. That's what I took away. That's what I want to be when I grow up, James.
There we go. I like it.
So let's get started here. The first thing I want to talk about is the history of ransomware. It was always been a thorn in our sides. And then as we've gone through time, especially over the past 18 to 24 months, it's gotten very, very sophisticated.
Yeah. I've been working IT for 30 plus years, and I worked cybercrime for the last 8 of my career in the FBI. And unfortunately, I got to really watch the rise of ransomware and really ransomware as a service that we see today. And I often said it came out of the Target attack, and I think it was 2012 when Target gets hit. And what happened there is that, there was this huge exploit of a very vulnerable system. And, they stole credit card numbers and went out and tried to sell them on the dark web. And that just didn't really work as a good business model because, credit cards can easily be canceled, and they were. And so we saw sort of 3 divisions come out of the criminal groups. The first was the programmers. The programmers wanted to put some distance between themselves and the crime that was being committed. And so they started actually going out and writing the software, and then they were looking for a place to sell their software, for example. Second group that comes out is these criminal groups that are much more organized than what we were used to. They are organized crime. I've used the term crime syndicates. And they were like, well, okay, so how do I weaponize this and how do I turn it into, a way to make money? And the third group was really the key. It was the dark marketplaces, the dark web and cryptocurrency exchanges. And so what happens is that you have these really smart people writing this software that are able to sell it to these criminal enterprises through dark marketplaces using cryptocurrency. And so in 2014, 2015, we start to see the rise of the early ransomware groups like Locker, Cerber, Locky, and they were very crude when we look at them in today's world, but they worked. They locked people out of their data, and people were willing to pay for that data. But a lot of those attacks were directed at the endpoint. So it would be a workstation, or it would be, individual machines. And they didn't really, as the businesses who were being victimized started recognizing that, they just said, you know what, I'm not going to pay this ransom. I'm just going to reload it. Then we started to see the attack change going after servers. And that was really 2018, 2019, where they started to say, you know what, we want to get to the source of the data. We want to hit the servers. People are much more likely to pay a ransom for their servers and get those back. So they did that. They had success. People started getting backups. They started saying, okay, I have to have a good backup of my server, and I need to have an insurance company that's willing to help me pay ransom. But then the crime group continues to evolve, and now what they do is they also target they say, oh, well, you're going to have somebody paying the ransom. Well, now I know that your insurance is $1 million. I'm going to ask for $1.5 million. So insurance started to drive up the price, and it's just kind of the nature of what happens there. So the criminal group started asking for higher ransoms, and this is where it's really changed to become much more devastating over the last 18 months. They're also stealing the data. So ransomware in the last 18 months has become also a data breach. And so it's that secondary extortion where, oh, you have good backups. Well, I also stole your data. Are you going to pay me to prevent the data from being exposed? A really big focus on that was JBS, which was the meatpacking plant. And they paid $11 million to prevent their data from being exposed. So we have to start recognizing these criminal groups are not kids living in basements in mom's house and asking for meatloaf or something like that. These are fully organized criminal groups operating, as a ransomware as a service model, and they are going to come after you no matter what your business is, no matter what your size is, and they're going to make you try to pay whatever that goal is.
I think that's an important point that a lot of people that just work in industry don't really understand, is that there are economic drivers on the criminal side of this. And where we started, like James was saying, was just selling data on the dark web. And I think the average person would be pretty disappointed to know how little their personal value is, or how much their personal information is actually worth on the dark web for exactly those reasons.
Well, yeah, credit cards were going for somewhere between $6 and $8. Social security numbers can go for anywhere from, $12 to $20, unless it's a virgin social security number, which means there's never been any credit. That can go for as much as to $100, $120. But email accounts, I can buy 100,000 email accounts for $1,000 or $1,500. So our data is not worth that much.
Right. So then the larger players, the organizations that came out of that, recognized that there was an economy of scale, if you will, in going after massive organizations, threatening data pools, but also threatening the reputations, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's the third extortion now. Now we're seeing they'll go to your customers and they'll put your name out on what they call a shame website, which they'll say this group was victimized. We've even seen some interesting cases where the criminals have turned the victims over to regulators. So in Western Europe, GDPR, for example, we've seen criminal groups report to regulators that they have breached companies, and then those companies have found themselves under regulatory investigation by GDPR.
So we've talked about the SolarWinds breach attack quite a bit. Let's shift gears and talk about something a little bit different, which was the Kaseya attack.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about the $11 million payment. What was the name of that company again?
JBS.
And they had something to do with the Kaseya attack. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the same group that attacks JBS then turns around and launches into Kaseya. Now, I believe, and I think there's other security people out there that believe, that the attack against Kaseya was a 0-day. They found a exploit that had been reported to Kaseya from a Dutch researcher, and it appears like they purchased that from a dark marketplace and then exploited that before Kaseya could patch it. The average time to patch a software vulnerability is somewhere between 70 and 90 days. They launched the attack 70 days after that Kaseya was notified by this Dutch researcher. So I don't think that timing was random. They got in, they launched their attack, and they were able to use Kaseya's access into other networks to launch at about 800 to 1,400 companies. So by paying the ransom, you're actually funding them to make a larger attack, and then that rebel, R-Evil, comes back and asks for $50 million from Kaseya. Did they pay it? That's a mystery, because that group goes out of business, or at least shuts down. But then Kaseya shows up with the decryptor, and in order for one of their companies to use the decryptor, they have to sign an NDA, which won't let them reveal how they got hold of that decryptor, which seems to indicate there may have been a payment of some type.
Right, which goes back to the idea that they want to protect their reputation.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. Yeah, I mean, nobody wants it to be heard that they actually negotiated with ransomeers. About a year ago, University of California, San Francisco got hit by an attack, and they actually hired a negotiator to go online and negotiate the price for the ransom. And the ransomeers contacted, I think it was BBC, and BBC was in the room, virtually in the room when they were having the conversation, and wrote up a thing about how that negotiation had gone. It was very embarrassing to the University of California, San Francisco. I mean, they're criminals and they love to embarrass people. I mean, that's the nature sometimes of hackers is they love to kind of stick it to the man or embarrass somebody. It gains them some street cred, and it gains them some sort of power, I guess, over the groups.
Yeah, and the other thing it does is if you pay the ransom so that your name doesn't get splashed across the newspapers, what you're also doing, A, you're giving money to criminals.
Yep.
And B, you're making what happened a secret, so other people aren't as alarmed as they probably should be.
Right. That's absolutely true. And that's where, I mean, there's all sorts of issues around that, because there's no requirement to notify anybody about the attack unless you're a publicly held company. And even then, there's some rules around it. Unless you're a financial company, then Sarbanes-Oxley comes into effect. But everybody looks for a way to hide it. They don't want to reveal it. And unfortunately, it's not for sometimes years that until we find out that a company has been hit.
This to me seems like a perverse incentive that cyber insurance has given us, in the fact that you're enabling criminals and you're minimizing the awareness in the population. What do you see in like 12 to 24 to 36 months in that way? Because I don't feel like this is a cycle that can continue.
No. So, I mean, insurance has already pushed back. We're already seeing insurance prices rising, and they're not really, most insurance companies are not willing to insure people against ransomware. That's the immediate effect. That's happening right now. So it means that companies are going to have to come up with a different solution. They're going to have to start thinking about, all right, well, how do I protect myself against ransomware? I think it's a good conversation. The problem is that there's so much security products in the marketplace right now that companies don't know where to go. And that's why one of the things I've been trying to do, and I think there's a lot of people kind of in that same area, is we've got to help people get to a good security solution without necessarily jamming a product down their throat. And so I think over the next 12 months, you're going to see companies saying, okay, this security product isn't working. I've had a lot of conversations with companies that say, I bought this, but it doesn't do anything that I thought it was going to do. So you'll see some compression in cybersecurity markets. You've already seen some of those cases where some of the bigger companies are buying up smaller companies. But also what we're looking for is how do I put all of my security products into one dashboard? So we're trying to see this push for integration. And I think that's where technology over the next 24 months is integrating into a singular dashboard, single panes of glass, to make it easier to find the nuggets of security.
I always smile when I hear that phrase, a single pane of glass. It's like cold fusion. We're going to have it 5 years from now. And that's been true for 50 years.
It's absolutely true. It's like zero trust, right? I mean, there's this huge push around zero trust, and there's actually even a working group created around zero trust. But what does that mean? And how do we get there? It's kind of like, trying to, nail Jello to a wall. And so I think we have to really, and it's going to be an individual by company is going to say, what does it mean to you? What does zero trust mean to you? What does a integrated security product look like to you? Also, we're starting to see companies being willing to say, you know what, I got to let somebody else do my security. But that's also turning us into the SolarWinds conversation, the Kaseya. Who do I trust? Who can I trust to not lose my data or cause me to be attacked by ransomware? That's a challenge right now too.
Well, I think the problem with that is that I don't think anybody really does it well. Look at the state of the world. Okay, we would not. You can't say that we would be in the condition that we're in, where there's 560,000 pieces of new malware detected every day on average. Okay, ransomware is up over 560% just from last year alone. 560%. That's huge. And, every week the news has a new breach. I don't think that you can, and we're not talking about small breaches. We're talking about global companies, major government institutions and agencies, nation state type attacks in certain cases, right? These are huge. These are massive. Accenture, SolarWinds, Kaseya, and then the people and the downstream people that were impacted. Just massive, massive impacts. And I don't think that you can say that we would be in this condition if people were doing cybersecurity well and holistically the way that we're supposed to, right? If you pick up an ISC handbook and you talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and you talk about risk management and risk mitigation, I just don't think that you can get to where we are if we were doing security well.
So much of this still just comes down to basic hygiene. I tell people that all the time. I'm like, before you're talking about a product, let me ask you a question. What operating system are you running? And then they'll start hemming and hawing. They'll be like, oh, we're still using Windows 7 or Windows XP. And I'm like, okay, then why are you talking to me about buying a new server when you're still trying to run Windows 7 on your endpoint? Or passwords, have you deployed anything like multi-factor authentication? Or, well, no, we haven't gotten there. Do you have an incident response plan? Do you have a backup plan? Do you have all? We're not having those conversations.
Where's your most important information?
Right.
I catch people with that one. They're like, I don't know.
I can tell you how many times I've gone into a company after they've been breached while I was with the FBI. And the first thing I would say is, okay, I got two questions for you. Number one, do you have a current map of your network? Well, okay, here we go. Number two, what data do you have that is core, key, and critical to your company, and where is it stored? Those two questions should be the basis of any risk determination for any company, but they're not being had. And so you're absolutely right. We have so many basics that we're not doing that it's not even about technology. It's about a mindset that we have to change.
Oh, that's it right there, man. We have got to change our mindset.
Well, here's a good thing around that. So Colonial Pipeline happens, and my nephew is a aide to a representative in the U.S. House. He calls me and he goes, "Why is this happening all of a sudden?" And I took the phone and I banged it against the desk, and I'm like, "Brother, I have been standing here for 4-5 years screaming about cybersecurity and basic hygiene, and nobody cares until it affects the gas prices of people in Washington, D.C. And I'm not trying to put it as a government issue, but we don't start thinking about it affecting us until it affects us. We have to all, and this starts at the top. This has to start at the top. And I mean, I hope that some of the executive orders will start driving the conversation. But if we don't start saying from the top, we have to be more cyber secure, and we're going to hold people to account for it, it's not going to happen.
Well, look at DNS, right? DNS runs the internet these days.
Right.
You don't do anything with DNS. And we still have an open DNS system,
yep.
Meaning it's not inherently secure by the way that it works. And that's why a lot of this ransomware and command and control can even occur.
Absolutely. I think, let's look further down the road. I think the other thing that's going to happen long term on the internet is we'll start to see enclaves of internet. This is already happening in Russia. China is already doing it, where they're attempting to close the internet so that they can control egress and ingress, right? I think the European Union is looking in that direction already about how do I control, especially for critical infrastructure, how do I control internet access and how do I control who can do what? And you're absolutely right. My core services like DNS have to be protected. And if they're not, then maybe what we need to do is change the model. And that's another conversation I've had about changing paradigm. How do we define insanity? Keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. We've got to change the way we do security and change the way we think about it.
I agree with everything that you said, with the small caveat that I don't necessarily want to over-regulate the internet, because I believe that there is a lot of good things that come from transparency and open data sharing. So I don't disagree that fundamentally we need to change and we need to do things to improve cybersecurity from a systems engineering level for the internet.
Well, and that's why my hope is like, for example, there's this Zero Trust Consortium. I think 18 companies got asked, and Microsoft is on that list. And technology companies can drive change without government intrusion. That's my hope. Now, people will say, well, you were in the FBI for 22 years. But I will absolutely tell you that we didn't have the bodies to regulate that. And putting those laws into place don't make it all of a sudden happen.
It's not even that complicated. Think about it. I mean, to get an SSL certificate, right? A good SSL certificate, I have to have a picture with my photo ID or two forms of photo ID, front and back, and I have to upload them, and they have to be certified so that I can get an SSL certificate.
Right.
For my own personal use, right? That I want to have my identity attached to. Well, what if we just started doing the same things with DNS? Like, sure, we'd be happy to give you DNS names, and you could spin up websites and get certificates, but we need to know that you're going to be doing it for a legitimate purpose, and you're not out there to hurt other people on the planet. For instance, you want to get a DNS registration for a domain? Absolutely, we'd love to do that. What is the purpose? What's going to be the function of it? And who are you?
Think about mobility. If I could go right now, I could be sitting here on one of my machines and I could go and get a developer account with Android, with the Google Marketplace, make a piece of software, upload it to their marketplace, and no one would care. They wouldn't check anything besides the fact that I paid whatever, $300 or whatever it costs.
I mean, even Apple, which has a much tighter handle on their app store, malware and bad software and even counterfeit software still gets through all the time. And it's really a volume-based problem.
Right. Well, Google said last year there were like 4.2 million malicious apps or something on their store. I was like, wow. I mean, but they didn't do anything to stop those. They didn't report it to anybody. They just took them down eventually once they discovered them.
Right. Which unfortunately means that most likely the way that somebody discovered it was that they already suffered harm.
Yes, absolutely true.
But there's trickle-down problems there too, right? So there's fundamental problems with the industry reacting to the threat of cybersecurity. So in the example that you just used, fine, developers are creating applications that aren't secure, or they're meant to be malicious, or they're fraudulent, or whatever, and they're getting them, through Apple and on the Apple Store, they're getting them up into the Google Play Store or whatever. Well, if we go and we try to regulate that, and we say, well, listen, you're going to go through this set of rigor in order to be able to meet the requirements to publish your software, right? Or publish your site, or I don't know, whatever. But now those people have to invest more time, more money, which is going to drive up prices because not everything is open source, right? And it slows down development. And, to invest in RASP and SAST and DAST tools, right? Dynamic application scanning and static application scanning and runtime application scanning, the barrier to entry, because the people that make those tools are charging an arm and a leg because they know the value that they're providing, and they know that people that want to write good code are going to pay a lot of money to get these tools. At the same time, we have a global issue of cybersecurity, and we're preventing people from getting the tools and techniques and capabilities that they need to be able to provide good cybersecurity, because we're creating barriers to entry through cost.
And in the United States, it's pretty non-regulatory. I mean, we are pretty much open, at least in a lot of those marketplaces. To me, it's the two extremes. You've got kind of China saying you can't do anything unless you've registered with us. And then you've got kind of the United States where it's like, well, we're pretty open and we don't want to set any rules. We don't want to get in the way of kind of the free market. Is there some place in between? Security and convenience will often diverge. I've said that a lot of times, where we want everything to be convenient and easy, but in doing that, are we willing to give up security on a daily basis? It's sort of, that's the kind of conversation I see a lot.
Well, we've already made that decision. That's exactly what we've done.
It's scary to me when I talk, especially to small and medium businesses, where they'll be like, well, I just hope nobody will come after me because I'm too small. And I'm like, how's that working for you? And I mean, especially when we see the numbers, you see the numbers of attacks that hit small and medium businesses are somewhere between 50 and 70%. I've seen those numbers pretty widely reported. They are getting hit. They're getting hit with ransomware. They're getting hit with data breaches.
Yeah, 70% of all ransomware over the past 24 months has been in the mid-market.
Right. But then you're like, well, so what's it going to take? I mean, what is going to be the conversation that's going to help you decide that security is important, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great segue. Let's talk about that. let's look at the future best practices in terms of any company building a solid security understanding framework and the tools that they need.
Well, that's it right there. You can't even have that conversation if you're going to use the word tool, because it simply doesn't matter, right? It's about understanding what you have. It's what you have that's valuable to you, and then taking the appropriate actions to protect it so that it can't be used against you or made a detriment to you.
Yes, exactly. I will tell any company, I said, so where do you start, right? Non-technical. Do a risk evaluation. Do a pen, you can do it externally, right? You can get with a company and say, hey, come in and can you help me do an evaluation of what my risk is? And then if you can do a pen test, do a pen test. Have one done. Have somebody show you exactly what would happen if you did suffer a breach.
And by somebody, you mean Anexinet.
What's that?
And yes, I said, and by somebody, you mean Anexinet. Have Anexinet.
Absolutely. Have Anexinet do it. Absolutely. I like that answer. People say, I hear all the time, well, I don't know where to go. Can you not know where to go? There's companies like Anexinet all there that are willing to sit down with you and say, let's talk about what you need to do. Then make your decision. You can make a decision that says, I'm not doing anything. Okay. Risk acceptance. Got it. You can say, what, I at least want to protect my core data. There we go. That's a step in the right direction. But it feels like a lot of companies aren't willing to have that conversation. And I don't understand why. I don't.
Yeah, you can't stay up all night and be afraid of something. And then, if something bad happens, you go, oh, why did this happen to me? Well, it's because you were afraid of it and you didn't do anything about it. And so now you're in a situation, right? You worried about it and you rocked in your worry rocking chair for forever, or you complained about it in your complaining rocking chair forever. In the meantime, the porch was on fire and it finally burnt down around you. And now you're looking at me wondering why with question marks coming out of your head.
It's going to happen to you. Statistically, if I was to look forward any 1 year, any one company has a 25% chance of being hit by ransomware in that year, if I was trying to predict it. So to me, it's Russian roulette. Eventually, that chamber is going to rotate on you. And I don't want to get into that, it's going to it's gloom and doom, but let's prepare for it. Maybe it never happens. That would be great. But preparation will lead to a much better outcome than waiting for something to happen and then trying to make your answers up on the fly. That never works.
And in terms of that kind of a security posture, let's talk about a few practical things that companies can at least think about and or do. One of the frameworks that we like to use is people, process, and technology.
Right.
So let's take it from the top. I think the obvious thing that people are already aware of is that the average computer user for a long time simply didn't know that these things were an issue. They didn't realize basic stuff like don't click on an email link that you weren't expecting, stuff like that. How do you see the level of education, end user and system administrator education, improving, over history, and how they can do better over time?
One of the 8 basics is training your people. People need to be trained around phishing. Phishing remains a very common attack vector. Everybody should be trained on it. And, it doesn't take a lot to do that. And then incentivize that a little bit. I've seen companies been very successful in whoever reports the most, phishing successfully in this month gets a $25 gift card to Starbucks, whatever it is. If you want to gamify it, whatever, but train your people. Train your system administrators. System administrators sometimes get the sort of this God complex and they think, oh, I'll never get caught by the bad guy. But they do. And then when that happens, you've just given up the whole access to the entire network, So everybody has to go through training. Everybody has to recognize their part in the security. So people are still, we always say, people are the weakest link in any security posture. So train your people. And then also when you train people so let's say you do a phishing test every quarter, which I think is low. I think once a month is probably better. You need to identify the people that keep failing. If Joni in HR fails every time, Joni probably needs some remedial training on this. And if Joni continues to fail after that, maybe we have to change the way we let Joni access email, whatever it takes, but recognize that risk and then take appropriate action.
Okay. And then the next one is process. I think, a lot of these all interact with each other. So one process that you just talked about was developing a regular and audited, which I think is key, phishing against your own employees as a type of an education. But what are some other policies that companies should look to be putting into action in their organizations?
Well, disaster recovery plan, backup recovery plans, right? So ransomware, they're going to go after your backups automatically. 75% of backups fail when you need them, right? So having a backup plan and testing it, having an incident response plan and testing it, having cyber insurance, but not for the reason that we were talking about. Cyber insurance value is not necessarily in helping you pay for ransomware as much as giving you relationships with like an incident response company. So something happens in your network and you call this incident response company, maybe it's a company like CrowdStrike, or maybe it's Anexinet, we all have a relationship. You call them, and that first phone call might make the difference between this event becoming a enterprise-wide event or me being able to limit it to one particular work center. So those are written policies that are built into it. Policies around passwords. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but we tell people to make passwords that are, secure, but what we end up doing is we create the same password over and over and over again. And I know a lot of people that do this. They'll put a date, $, and then those increment 01, 02, 03, and the system allows them to do that. So policies, but also policies that can be checked, because we want to trust, but we have to validate and verify that people are doing what they say they're going to do.
Right. Policies, but policies with teeth and policies that are audited.
Right. Absolutely. And right. So you've got to come in and say, for example, passwords. If I'm like on a Windows system, I could pull my password database out of my Windows system and run that against the password cracker to see if anybody's using bad passwords or weak passwords. Those are positive steps that say, and then you go to that person and say, hey, your password's too weak, change it. Those are things we have to do. We have to get smarter about that. I was doing a presentation for a company, or at a luncheon event here in Houston, and this guy came up to me afterward and said, "My CEO doesn't believe in security. What do I do?" And I sort of tongue in cheek said, "Leave that company." And I said, and this person is their security officer. I said, if this person's not willing to back you up on introducing things like because he wouldn't let them do multi-factor authentication. He wouldn't let them do phishing testing. I was like, that is a resume generating event for you, not for that person. And so you need to find a place where security, if you're a security officer, you need to find a place that security is given the teeth to do what it needs to do to actually protect the company, protect its assets.
That's one of those things that I hear from people that are in the security profession a lot. And they're like, well, I just can't get anything done. And I don't disagree that sometimes you run into people that just don't take it seriously, right? They really don't believe that the risk is as great as it is. But I also have a lot of experience to tell me that normally the senior executive leaders that I talk to that don't understand the risk or have a hard time believing in the risk is because you haven't managed to explain it to them in a way that meets them on their level or makes it resonate with them. And I think that's the part that falls to us as cybersecurity professionals is we need to get better at explaining the risk and making it real to people. You have to make it matter to them.
That's why, like when I talk to, like CIOs, for example, or IT managers, you have to be able to talk to executive management and, like you're saying, what they understand, risk. But part of that is do a risk assessment, have an external risk assessment done. Then you can go back and say, I had a risk assessment done, and these are critical needs, and these are high, and these are moderate, and these are low. And then that helps you drive that. And when they say, what does critical risk mean? It means that if we don't fix that and we get hit, we are going to lose everything. Oh, that I understand, and I will be down if I get hit with ransomware and you hit that data source right there. We're going to be out of business for 16 days. Whoa, okay. I mean, that drives a better conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, not too long ago, I had a conversation with somebody, and we started talking about, how to assess risk, right, and what was really important. And I started asking some questions about, well, what happened? I said, tell me about this process that you told me was very important to you, this business process. And they explained it to me, and kind of gave me the outline of the business process, and even some of the the technology, right? Like, we need information to come from this place, and we need to get it. We need to do stuff with it, and then we need to send it back out or use it to make decisions. And I said, okay, well, what happens if you can't get that information? So that communication channel, right? However that information comes to you from whatever source, what if you can't get it? They said, I don't think that, we can't function. We can't really do anything.
Right.
Now, let's take this same methodology, right? This same framework of thinking, and let's go through business process and supporting technology until we arrive at a prioritized risk register. And then we know exactly what to do and exactly what to protect. Like, it's about managing risk. This is how you run a business in 2021. Like, people have got to get on board with that.
Well, and you're spot on. I mean, you really are, because I'm amazed how many companies just, I don't feel like are there. And so when you talk to a company and they're like, well, yeah, we feel like we're pretty good, but I'm like, well, have you done this? No. Have you done this? No. Have you done this? Then how are you feeling really good about things? Well, we don't think we're going to get hit. So your security is through obscurity. I went and did a presentation at a church one time, and I asked the priest, I said, so what's your security posture? And he goes, faith. God won't let us get hit. So let me ask you a question. So it was coming up on Christmas time, and what do the cops tell you about presents? They say, well, don't leave them on the front seat and lock your doors, right? And do you? Well, of course I do. So you're willing to trust that police officer, when he tells you that your presents are going to get stolen off your front, but you're not going to be willing to trust a cybersecurity guy that's going to tell you your data is going to get stolen off your front porch if you don't lock the door at a minimum. No. Okay, yeah. Got it.
Yeah. It's like, I've been doing this for 26 years. I can't tell you how many times I've been up for 72 or 96 hours at a time working on incident response.
Right.
And then you're gonna confidently look at me across the table and say, I don't think I'm gonna get hit. Yeah, guess what? Nobody that I did those things with thought they were gonna get hit either. Some of them didn't think they were gonna get hit the second or the third time, but they did.
And that's the scariest thing is and I think that's the reality. We have to first get over the hurdle that I'm not going to get hit. You are going to get hit, period. Second, once you accept that, what is the most important part of your company that you want to protect?
Spend the money where it matters the most, right? Protect what matters the most.
Exactly.
With the last 7 or 8 minutes we have here, let's hit the last pillar from the people, process, and technology, and that is the technology. We don't need to talk about specific tools, but there are definitely improvements that have been made over the years. I think one that a lot of people will remember, going back to the Windows XP example, was that when you installed Windows XP, every user was an administrator.
Right.
Obviously, that wasn't good.
And the administrator account had no password. That was a
right.
So, a popular term, and we talked about it at the top of the show, is zero trust, which is it's actually more of a process and more of a program than it is properly a technology, but it has implications for technologies, including, like SD-WAN, for example, and the ways that people log in and traverse the system. So with the 6 minutes we have left, can you please explain all of that?
Sure, I can do that. Yeah. So zero trust simply says, I don't trust anything inherently. Right? So everything has to be validated and retrusted. Every device you add to your network adds risk to your network. So what you want to get to is the mindset of, how do I protect that? So if I'm adding IoT devices, how am I going to make sure that IoT, that web camera, or that doesn't become a place of vulnerability to my network? If I'm adding mobility, let's say I'm doing a BYOD, I have to have a security layer that makes sure that those phones aren't going to be a place that my data could be lost. So zero trust simply says, I'm going to wrap up every element of my network and not trust it inherently. So that means, it could be multi-factor authentication. It could be, edge security devices. Could be, something like CrowdStrike Falcon or whatever that looks at the security at the edge. But your network is individual. Every network is unique. Every network has its own idiosyncrasies. So you want to make sure first what you do is you sit down with a company like Anexinet and say, here's what I want to do. Talk to them about your security, where you're going. And then once you talk to them and they get a good idea as to what your future goal is, then technology becomes icing on that cake. Technology, it could be something like maybe it's time to get a new firewall. Maybe it's time to, get a centralized, backup system through HPE and maybe it's an air-gapped network, system like, our backups like Nimble or 3PAR or whatever. But first thing is to have that conversation before you start talking about technology. If you're talking technology before somebody gets an understanding of what you're trying to do, they're trying to push a product. So let's first try to know where we're trying to go before technology becomes the end all be all.
Dave, do you have any final thoughts before we close out?
No, not anymore. You killed the moment.
You harshed his buzz. What's up?
No, it's all right. I'm just messing with him. I didn't have anything important to say.
James?
Start the conversation. Have the conversation. Talk about what you're trying to do, what's important to your company. Get an evaluation of where your risk is. And as David said, what is core to your company? If there's a process or a data store that is core to your company, shouldn't your security be focused around that? But instead, we try to protect everything. And then maybe that's the answer. Maybe we try to protect only what's really important and leave some of the other stuff for not to be protected right now.
Yeah. And educate people. I think educating,
yes.
That is is a whole separate topic, right? Just like we're trying to educate people and leaders about what they need to do, cybersecurity is just as important as breathing because we live in a digital age, right? Everything has a digital footprint somewhere. And if you're not taking ownership and taking responsibility for some sort of data stewardship for that digital footprint, this is going to continue to be a problem. And educating people, they're not computer engineers, they're not software engineers. They didn't have a computer accessible to them or need to have a computer accessible to them all day, every day, just to be able to live their lives. And so they're not up to speed, and educating people will help.
Absolutely true. Couldn't have said it better.
All right.
All right.
I think that's all we have for today. Dave, James, thank you for your time.
Yes, James.
Thank you all very much.
Appreciate doing this.